According to JD News, on October 1st, 1908, Henry Ford introduced his Model T automobile to the market. What would happen if the assembly line was not around?
On October 1st, 1982, Sony launches the first consumer compact disc player, model CDP-101. What would have happened if the compact disc was not allowed to gain its iron hold on the music industry? What sort of a world would we have if MP1 was allowed to take over before the industry had wanted it to?
This is Spiritus Holographica. I'm your host, Wolfman, and this is
Ricky Bearhart here.
And first off, let's talk about the automobile. And Mark, what's that word for it?
Well, you could say the automotive assembly line, the assembly line, but the general concept is mass production.
Let's just say they didn't come up with mass production.
Well, the reason I would say so is because you think about what is mass produced as far as mechanical engineering, and I would think that the enclosed cartridge, as far as bullets are concerned, that means you could I'm sure that predates the automobile, and you could produce hundreds to thousands to tens of thousands of those. So the concept of mass production, I mean, it was always in contest with me when I would talk to people about what came first. Ford's mass production line for his Model T, or the concept of, well, these bullets. I mean, they were able to generate hundreds of them, right?
They were able to generate hundreds of them. And this is what I'm thinking. Let's just say they don't come up with the Model T and mass production and everything else. Let's just say they don't. How much longer it would take people to accomplish things without that production coming into play?
Well, I mean, first of all, it's about precision. If each individual car has to be hand fabricated, there's no uniformity. Now, this has implications that travels all over the industrial singularity. Now, what do I mean by industrial singularity? Cave paintings led to cuneiform on clay tablets. Clay tablets led down the line to hand-scribed pages, copying words. So each book took years to reproduce. But then came Gutenberg and Gutenberg's printing press, and that changed everything and made for the Renaissance, made for the first banking empires, and the mess we have ourselves in today. Now, we go further than that into the singularity. If you can't have a mass production line, which is precision mechanical engineering turning out the same part over and over again, each car is a handmade work, which means you have an artisan class of car rights or automobile rights, the way they made ships in the old days when it was an art. Mass production in the printing press has the same implication as mass production for bullets or for automobiles.
So if Ford wasn't around, who would be the one who would take credit for the mass production of the automobile?
Well, I mean, I would say the next in line industrial giant. I mean, I don't know. I'm not exactly sure where to go with that, but the inevitability of the singularity means that someone would have put it together.
Someone would. It's kind of like, let's just say, the light bulb. There were how many people working on that light bulb at the same time? One person or two got credit.
Yeah, there were many, many different incandescent light bulbs, and Edison got credit for one of the successful ones. Tesla was forced to reinvent the light bulb for the World's Fair because Edison refused to share his patent on the matter, which is the typical hive-minded thing that Edison did. But the point is that had Ford not done it, someone else would have done it. Because the goal was to create a network. And that that word is a big deal to the Singularity. Now,
and we got to take into account what was going on around the time of 1908.
Yeah.
The fact that automobiles were starting to come around. They weren't major, but people were starting to drive more than
the horse and buggy.
The horse and buggy, exactly.
Well, they were measuring engines and horsepower, I think, by that point too, right?
And they were measuring it, and the fact is, at the time, there were no real known roads, which means there was no road construction. And the fact that... It
didn't happen until, I think, after World War II, right? The highway project?
Yeah, the highway project.
It had to do with, was it Roosevelt or was it Eisenhower?
It was Roosevelt that started it.
Yeah.
And then, they came up with the roads. But the fact of the matter is...
It's probably modeled after the Autobahn.
It was very dangerous to drive one of these automobiles on the road because you had horse and buggy, you had people who were walking in trolleys, if there was any trolley around, or something like that. Certainly,
you'd have a threat from mixed traffic, but the thing that I would say is, without paved roads, without a regulated tire, I mean, you didn't have a guarantee you were going to get anywhere. What if the road was too muddy? What if your tire busted? I mean, it's far from the way it is today. Very far.
I was watching The Time Machine.
The old one or the remake?
It was the remake. It was where he went 600,000 years down the line, and
with the Morlocks after the moon blew up.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a wicked movie.
But there's this one part of the movie where the automobile went out of place, and something got lost, and it ran over his wife.
Well, the love of his life, and he was in some sort of a nexus paradox where he couldn't avoid her doom.
So he had to go into the future.
Well, I don't exactly know why he did what he did, but all I know is it's an example of what is fated. All right, and that's a whole other hornet's nest for another day. I mean, what we can say, like I said, is the Singularity is an inevitable, and it's fated. It's fated. Now, I don't know about any individual death, but when you create an industry around projectiles, whether they be automotive or ballistic, there's going to be a lot of energy flying around, and that energy can be channeled in a variety of ways.
But what happens? Let's just say this.
Yeah.
And I know you're saying the Singularity.
Yes.
What happens if the automobile doesn't get created? What kind of world will we live in? How would our transportation be?
Well, I mean, like I said, the concept of the internal combustion engine, in my opinion, is an inevitability of the Singularity, which is data. People are going to say, well, it's human ingenuity. And yes, that's part of it, and I'm not trying to de-emphasize human ingenuity. But what the other thing it is it's Singularity. Now, if you read Ray Kurzweil, the futurist, he's the one that chiefly promotes this. And he says that in his math that there is a trend towards exponential return. The exponential return is, if I have this many here, I might have this many more later because we have a continuation. You had all the inventing that started in the Renaissance. You had things compounding, and then eventually you had steam engines. Now from steam, we went over to internal combustion. Internal combustion could drive a drivetrain and an axle. They already knew what a horse and buggy was. So then you have the mutant crossover.
But Ricky.
Yes.
Let me ask you this question.
Mm-hmm.
And you're explaining a little bit right now.
Mm-hmm.
What exactly would one of these machines look like?
Well, it's the automobile.
I mean, if the automobile wasn't around.
Well, you would have to have something that's more efficient than the wheel.
Yeah.
What's more efficient than the wheel? Can you immediately come up with an answer?
So we would have to date back all the way to the beginning, where they created the very first wheel.
Well, my point is a wheel is a ring of varying complexity, but it's circular, and no one creates a circle. A circle is part of geometry. It exists in data, which is part of what the singularity is and why it's important to differentiate. Not a lot of people have a full grasp on the relationship between data and energy and what that means. The reason, there's a phrase called reinvention of the wheel, to reinvent the wheel.
To reinvent the wheel, very good one.
Now, how does one reinvent something that is almost perfect in its efficiency? The circle is elegant. It does what it does for a reason, because it's part of the hologram.
Yeah.
The mathematical precision of the universe, the golden ratio, the spiral, vortex mathematics, all these complicated things that are evidence of, in my humble opinion, a designer, an author, because otherwise it's a giant coincidence, and coincidences are cool when they happen in little bits, but after a while you have to wonder. Kurzweil says that you're going to have a greater and more progressive end. And it's interesting because he comes at it, I mean, from an evolutionary standpoint. Automobiles belong to the singularity, but the singularity is, by Kurzweil's reckoning, an extension of evolution. He's saying that whatever was going on in our DNA made this inevitable, the automobile. In other words, all the way back before we invented the wheel was already going to be invented by the exponential return of the singularity. It was just waiting to get to that point, assuming the energy would survive extinction. I don't know that he directly says these things. This is what I extrapolate from his math. I read about half of one of his books called The Singularity is Near, which I would recommend to anyone, because it explains futurism. Now, I've heard a lot of poo-poo and oh, that's rubbish and whatnot from people who act like that's not going to happen. But all you got to do is go to your YouTube page and type in DARPA. Okay. And take a look there and see what they're doing.
Okay, very good, Rick.
Now, we'll get back to the point at hand by segueing us into my point. And we'll do a compare and contrast, if that's all right with you.
That is perfectly fine. And before we do that,
yes,
it's very important we get plugs out for our brand.
Well, that's fine. I'm Ricky Bearhart, a guest from the Ulcanus Network. The Ulcanus Network is a benevolent parallel podcast network who are we're all friends over there of the Joseph Vivaldi brand. And we have 6 working channels on the Ulcanus Network right now. We're working on getting some audiobooks put up. A spoken word CD, Machinations of the Cybernetic Phantom God, was just put up. That was a project from 2004. And it's a section of the book called The Muses, Signs, and Wonders, which should be appearing on Amazon.com very, very soon. And we have Temporality's Shadow, which is a paranormal investigation podcast where Twilight Cricket reads into a spirit radio designated Arcanon 1. And we record vocal anomalies, and you play them back on the slow playback, and you can hear the evidence of some strange vocal anomalies going on there. The Olkanus Network features the creative talents and writing of Richard Andrew Olkus. The Olkanus Network. Audiobooks, poetry, spoken word, paranormal investigation, a creative baptism for every day. Find us on Spreaker.com and Amazon.com.
Okay, I am coming on as Joseph Vivaldi, and I am going to plug two things. One, an audiobook that is going to come out in November sometime. It is called A Soul Warrior's Journey. This is my very first paperback, and good things are ahead. I mean, Andrew Garrett is working on it, and it should be very good. And it's about Joseph Woods, who has addiction problems, who bumps into Matthias Anderson, who helps him out with his addiction problems, and also unlocks some of his dreams, which entail angels. And also, I'd like to plug the Journal of the Dreamscapes, which is one of the shows by Joseph Vivaldi featuring Ricky as co-host. And the show features dream journals, dream interpretation, and dream analysis. It's a very good show to check out. And one more thing that I gotta plug is the Ricky and Wolfman show. For those who've been watching Back to the Future, 1 had its analysis, and Ricky and Wolfman went over it, and Back to the Future 2, the analysis of that is coming November and December. Stay tuned.
Yeah, I've been having a lot of fun watching those classics, and you can put them on your screen and watch them along with us and dig on what we're saying. We got an old school take. And those other shows are fun too, man. Check them out.
Now, Ricky.
Yeah.
You were mentioning in the beginning of the show, beginning of the podcast,
yes,
about the CD and Sony. Could you please elaborate? That's a very interesting topic.
Yeah, I've always thought so. So there's a thing that a lot of people don't realize. Compact discs, CDs, I mean, they were being used, to my understanding, since the early 70s for computing. They weren't mainstream because laser science is the big deal. CDs use a lot of power because they have moving parts, there's a motor and a laser and whatnot. And that was part of where I'm going with this. The other part I'm going with this is there was a format called MP1. Now, you're aware of MP3 and MP4.
Oh, yeah.
Well, those are successive iterations of what was originally called MP1. Now, MP1, I don't know if it happened in the early 80s, but it happened around the time of the big computer boom, where you had Apples and Commodores. Now, you could play a sound file on your computer on what was called an MP1 file.
Yeah.
Now, they were giant files because memory was very small.
Yeah.
And at first, you wouldn't be able to do a lot with that. But they dashed the industry, the MP1 industry, because they knew the inevitable of what it meant. When you have something like a record, now, the music industry began with what they called albums. All right, albums, like a photo album, there was a musical album because it represents a segment of time.
Yeah.
Photos represent a particular age or an event. Same thing with an album. Now, they were putting albums on vinyl records. CDs came after 8-tracks. Again, we're dealing with a singularity. But CDs, the thing that vinyl records had that 8-tracks didn't, 8-tracks were re-recordable.
Yeah.
Let's bear this in mind. CDs, when they were first issued, were not re-recordable.
No, as a matter of fact, from what I remember with the CDs,
yes,
you could just play through the CD. They were not re-recordable unless they had CDs that were able to be re-recorded on a computer, but you couldn't record over the CD.
It took them a long time to figure out how to make re-recordable CDs for a commercial market, and to my understanding, it was never done officially by a corporation. To my understanding, it was done by some hacker. But for all I know, that could be some mummer's tale or some sort of, urban legend, quote unquote. The thing that I'm going to say, though, is when you have an 8-track that's rewritable, you can go to the store and buy an 8-track, and you could record from one to another and make a copy. And when you record that copy, it's free.
Kind of like how the cassette.
That was a step that was missing. We went straight from 8-track to CD, but it said that the first commercial CD player came out on this day in 1982. 1982 is pretty far back. I mean, 8-tracks were still going on. Cassettes were a parallel market.
That's about 36 years ago.
It's quite a while ago, and it's beyond obsolete now because no one knows what 8-tracks are. Cassettes are a mystery to kids today, and I remember making mixtapes when I was a kid. Now CDs are starting to go obsolete, where you don't even see a lot of those anymore. You can see on my shelves here in the Okanut Studios where we're recording this podcast, you can see we have plenty of CDs in here.
And I have some cassettes still at my house.
I have cassettes, but very, very few, because I haven't owned a cassette player in years. Now, here's the thing about an MP1 that they knew. Computers weren't going to be going away. When you have a console video game system, they control the cartridge and they control the console. Now, same thing with the CD. When you have a format that is frozen, they control the CD player, what it does. They control the CD, what product you get. However, if you have an MP1, yes, like a giant cleaver, this however falls. If you have an MP1 format, your computer you own today can play it. The computer you buy 2 years ago can play it. 2 years later can play it. The computer you buy 10 years later can play it. Because the format would go ahead. And they wouldn't get their money. So as soon as they saw the MP1, they did everything within their power to smash it down. Because they knew that they would lose all the money from 1982 all the way to Napster. And you remember Napster.
Oh, let me explain about Napster. They could download whatever they wanted.
Yes.
Any song you wanted, they could download.
Yes.
And the thing is,
because we had shareable files.
What happened?
MP2 or MP3.
What happened? And I will repeat. Talc came around.
Yeah.
Got upset.
They sure did.
And they said,
Or in a China shop.
We're not getting paid for our work and everything else. So that stopped the sharing. Then Steve Jobs said, hey, I have an MP3 that is called an iPod. It's going to have music on it, and you could pay for it.
Yes, and his iTunes was certainly, if not the first, then one of the first that started to do that. The point is it caught on in a big way because of the Apple Corporation's success. However, it represented the gloving of the MP3 format into a control software. Now, this is the correlation, this is the parallel with the automotive industry.
But before you do that, I want to mention this invention of a website called YouTube, which had videos of everything, which means you could watch the videos you want from a long time ago with that music on. Just saying that.
Okay. Well, what YouTube did was YouTube took your home video, and I don't mean VHS. I mean the way I mean VHS, but they were already starting to get some digital stuff when YouTube was coming up. You could take a home camcorder or a digital camera and take your home videos and make your own America's Funniest Home Video on YouTube. Originally, it was just a cable show that was on cable television where you saw people's videos that they mailed to VHS, they mailed a copy of. But you basically took that show and turned it into an exploding inevitable, where now any video can be uploaded onto YouTube from all over the internet.
And singers, musicians, anybody else could actually profit off those videos through advertisement for sales, and also they could go viral with advertisements.
Yes, well, that goes down an even deeper rabbit hole of e-commerce and the concept of the economic internet, which is a whole other branch of singularity that's beyond this. It has implications with both YouTube and MP3 files. But getting back to the automotive angle, you can build an automobile on a website now. You can tell them what options you want. Now imagine that you had mass production for low models, but you also had a place where you can build your own custom automobile, and that's what that corporation was for. In other words, you design every bit of it, and it comes off like you want it to, instead of, now, there's aerodynamic questions, there's engineering limitations, etc., etc. There's things that you wouldn't be able to do. But the point is that the automobile is significantly taken out of the hands of the owner, the purchaser. There's a lot you don't have a say over. When it comes to safety, that's not a problem, but certain elements of engineering, I know mechanics, and they've told me various things. When you have a corporation that has executive control over the engineering, you have no say in how ridiculous that engineering is. And they engineer obsolescence into cars. They have failure that's engineered into cars where they have things that are timed to go at a certain point. And the point is it leads us to the industry we have today, which is comparable to MP1. MP1 was in the interest of the consumer. The automobile industry of today, it's hard to say really if it's in the interest of the consumer. As the cars grow more electronic, more digital, they're almost like devices. Because your car has Bluetooth, some of them are hotspots, some of them have internet. So they're becoming more and more technological as far as the internet is concerned, which of course assists in all of the apps and tracking both known and unknown. But now we get to the point of, would Henry Ford be able to understand where his industry went in a century plus? Where now we're so far down the line that we have cars, and beyond Ford, there are luxury cars that are, it's getting to the point now where they're saying they're going to be making self-driving cars.
Wow.
Now, they're years off yet, but right around the corner, because a lot of people would always say, well, how would you ever have music in a car? They put record players in early cars, but that, when you bounce on the road, you can't have a record player in a car.
Yeah.
So eventually they came up with, playable cassettes, and now you have internet in the car, and now you have this, and now you have that. So what will tomorrow's car look like?
Yeah. Now,
is it in the interest of the consumer? I don't know. Would Henry Ford even care about the consumer? I don't know. If he's the typical industrialist, probably not.
Speaking on the future a little bit, and considering this show is Spiritus Holographica, I want to leave the show with this note. And then we can do plugs. My dad was mentioning to me today that the upcoming phones are going to have holographic features. And which means you could talk to the person on the phone, and through the video, they could appear in holographic form. That is what my dad was telling me.
Well, what do you mean holographic? Like an actual help me Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're my only hope?
Like a hologram.
Well, they're developing holograms. I mean, they already have some stuff like that in Japan. I don't know how far it's coming along, but yeah, eventually. We already have George Jetson stuff with FaceTime and Skype.
Yeah.
So, it's right around the corner when it comes to that. Question is will it turn like Star Trek and we'll have transporters, warp drive and all this good stuff? That's what I'm interested in.
Ricky, I personally would like teleportation, because that way
transporters.
I could be transporters. Because I could be home and I could go to work without the effing commute. Pardon my language.
Yes, of course. What he's really saying is, without the hassle of driving an automobile in the modern day right of way, which is an insurance nightmare, and stacked piles of liability and responsibility for a car that's, wouldn't it be better if you could just Mega Man your way from your house to your job?
And isn't that a perfect way to leave the end of this podcast?
You can tell that Joseph Vivaldi loves to drive. Yes, this is the end of the podcast. This has been Spiritus Holographica. I'm Ricky Bearhart from the Okanus Network, just here to tell you about the Okanus Network podcast. We have a bunch of different channels. Go check them out on Spreaker.com.
I am Joseph Vivaldi. I'm coming on as Joseph Vivaldi, and I'm plugging the Joseph Vivaldi Network. Many good shows on. Check out my Amazon page, Joseph Vivaldi. Look up my name. A few good books are on there. And also, I rarely say this, but my WordPress page. JosephVivaldi.blog. Some of my older blogs, newer blogs. That's how you stay up to date with what's going on with the Joseph Vivaldi brand. And with that note, I'm going to leave it like this. This is Parallel Earth, Parallel Reality, Parallel Universe. This is Spiritus Holographica, and I'm your host, Wolfman.
It's Ricky Bearhart saying goodbye, everyone. Thanks for listening, and you go in harmony.